Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on troubleshooting for delivery of service during the coronavirus outbreak. I'm Tisha Tallman. I'm the Executive Director of NACCE. And just a few things before we get started. If you're on telephone, you can mute and unmute by hitting *6. If you're on a computer, you can mute and unmute by doing Command D if you're on a Mac, and Control D if you're on a PC. If you have any questions, feel free to put the questions in queue on chat, and they'll be taken following all the presentations in the order in which they are received through the chat. And that's about it. I think we'll also check chat. There will be links that will be appearing in the chat lines too as the presenters present and after they present. But again, we'll take questions from the chat queue once the presenters have presented. Today for the Central Time Zone, we do have 3 presenters, and Julie is out of Detroit, Carrie's out of Chicago, and Michael is out of San Francisco. And we're going to start with Julie. Each of the presenters will introduce themselves, and then they'll have their presentation. Again, if you have a question, just put it in queue in the chat, and we'll address them as soon as everybody's done with their presentations. Thank you again for joining us. Julie?
Good morning or afternoon, depending on if you are Central Time Zone or Eastern, because that's what most of you are here today. I am Julie Radican. I am the Vice President of NACCE, along with my other job is I am the Homeless Youth Services Coordinator, Regional Coordinator for McKinney-Vento for Wayne County, Michigan, which is the city of Detroit and its surrounding communities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a PowerPoint to share with you. So bear with me as I put that up for you. Hopefully you are able to see that at the moment.
Yes.
I lost seeing you guys, so we're there. So with this, we just wanted to take some time and with my role within Michigan, I'm housed at a community action agency. So we have not only supports through the school system, but also through the housing world. So I wanted to start today kind of talking about what some of those housing resources are that are out there in ways that we are anticipating seeing them help our families through the COVID-19 crisis and thereafter. So we know that we're getting over $3 billion in aid through the CDBG, which is the Community District Block Grant across the nation. So that's being split out. So we should be seeing those. Under that is funds for housing assistance, utility assistance, burial assistance, all sorts of different programs that are going to be community specific on how your communities wrote for those grants. We are seeing quite a bit of an influx in services for veterans through some supportive services for veterans funds, along with quite a few additional funds for our ESG, which is our emergency solutions grants. These will show a lot of resources and some supports for homeless prevention, which we're going to see a bigger need and upswing for once all of our eviction delays have kind of come back into fruition. So when landlords are able to start evicting again, we will see a part of a lot of this. And I know Michael's going to talk a bit more about that. So these are just a couple of the snapshots of kind of what's been out there and what we're working towards. I know us as an organization is launched this week on our CARES applications and our CARES funds, and are going through applications quickly on what that looks like and how we're able to serve and make sure that these funds are truly getting to everybody in the community that does need them. So what we're seeing school-wise, as many of you know, is the Education Stabilization Fund through CARES, being able to provide assistance to K-12 students, higher education students, and then the Governor's Relief Program, which was released first for school districts to apply directly to their governors to get some supports. So with these school supports, we are seeing flexibility in being able to use Title I funds and flexibility in school nutrition and other things in which we are able to just really expand those services that are able to provide to our students and really ways in which we can collaborate to best serve our students through this distance learning, and ways to really remove those barriers, not only for our homeless students, but for our house students as well. So really seeing a lot of us coming together in different ways in which we're able to serve students, and ensuring that there's equity, so that as things are progressing and as things are coming out around distance learning, that we are considering all of our students, making sure that if we're putting in distance learning plans that include the need to use a internet device or an electronic device or something like that, making sure that all of our students are able to get their hands on that. Being able to make sure that there are ways and resources in which students can connect to those services. We are seeing districts across the nation be super creative in ways in which they are serving their students, and getting more and more to that, as we're seeing more and more school districts across the nations and states close down schools for the duration of the school year. A few specific things on Michigan. Michigan was the first to put into place the pandemic electronic benefit transfer. So there's our food benefit. We, as a state, were able to provide additional funds for students who are 0 through 26, to allow for food assistance if any student met free and reduced lunch. So this was an additional fund that was added to people's bridge card, or their food benefits, or SNAP, however you refer to them in your area. And it was able to increase that for people who already got it. And for families who did not receive food benefits, they were able to get new benefits based on this PEBT. We quickly, especially here in Wayne County, were able to see food distributions just jump off the ground from the day that schools closed. Many districts either provided multiple locations where families could pick up a day's or multiple days worth of food, along with other districts passing out food along bus lines, figuring out ways in which their families can truly get access to this food. For students that are not able to get to those, figure out ways to distribute them out to their families. So including those going out to the bus stops, providing special transportation for those that need access but don't have the means to get to those access. The majority of our school districts in the state just wanted to know that it was going to a school child. It didn't have to be to a student that attended their schools, as long as it was a school-age child, and even allowed for parents to pick up on behalf of kids without the kids having to be present. So that's been a big thing that's been helpful in getting food to all of our students. Another big thing that we're seeing a lot across Michigan is the extra need for emergency shelter. As families who have met McKinney-Vento definition prior and were living doubled up are losing that doubled up situation, or are losing situations due to potentially being COVID positive and or testing positive for COVID, we are seeing the need for a greater shelter. So one of the things that was done in our area is our rotating church shelter. It gains a permanent place, and allowed for more people to be able to attend that shelter. Other places across our state have rented out entire hotel buildings and are able to use those hotel buildings as their shelter during this time. We have arranged different ways in which we're able to quarantine families that have been exposed or have tested positive for the quarantine and isolation period required under COVID. The city of Detroit was able to open an entire wing to their emergency shelter that allows for that isolation and that quarantine for those that are experiencing COVID, along with staff for it, and supplying PPE, so the personal protective equipment that's needed for shelter staff and for the other people that are helping volunteer within those sites and those locations. Michigan is offering free COVID testing to everybody as of this week. Prior to that, it was people that were working within shelters or medical places. People who were at high risk and considered essential workers were those that were first and foremost able to get that testing. But in recent days, it's been open to everybody, and there's drive-up clinics. You just have to call your local testing places to be able to go do that, and it's a quick test in and out for that. So other things that we at NACCE are hearing from across the nation, and ways in which families can be assisted and some troubleshooting and some ways in which you all can help your families is ensuring that families know about the stimulus checks and how to get them. They've even, if they filed taxes in 2018 or 19, and they provided a bank account, it gets directly deposited to that same bank account. If not, going to the IRS website and registering their bank account on there is a good way. U of M Poverty Solutions, in partnership with Sevilla and the City of Detroit, put out a great tip sheet on how to access those. So we'll make sure that that gets shared to everybody as ways in which people can access those stimulus checks. I know that South Carolina and I believe it was Austin, Texas, are two places that are using their school buses as hotspots and taking them to areas in which normally don't have internet access and using their buses as internet for that. So that's a tip or a trick that you all might be able to use. Another big thing that our liaisons are seeing is that ability to be able to video chat, similar to this, of being able to put a face for their students. There's a lot of times where we all know, especially us that have kids at home, how difficult it is to maintain a 40-hour work week and be able to help our kids with homeschool or help our kids do different things, but being able to have school staff that is able to connect with our kids and offer that additional support has been phenomenal for some of our students. It also is a great thing for our homeless students if they're able to just kind of have that face-to-face interaction with those people that they're closest with at school, and they've had that great relationship going up into this point. Also accessing other community supports, being able to know what's in your community, making sure that those are available or links to those are available on your school's website or your school's Facebook page, places where your families really look at those the most. And then Proposity was mentioned on the Today Show, and one of the co-founders is actually also a NACCE board member. So it is a great giving app where people can go in and look at the needs that a school district has that is signed up for Proposity, and being able to help and directly get those needs directly to the family through that app. So we'll make sure all those links are shared in our after this event so that everybody is able to see those. But for those that need it, here's my contact information if you have tips and questions. I know that Carrie and Michael have a lot of information to share, so I want to make sure we have time for them as well, and making sure that everybody has what they need. But if you have questions, please reach out and we'll be able to answer those for you.
Thank you, Julie. And for everyone that just recently joined, if you have a question, please put it in the chat and it will be addressed in the order in which it's received in the queue, and it'll be addressed following each of the presenters. Julie just presented. We have 2 more presenters. Also, so you know, this is being recorded. It will be provided, the link will be provided following the presentation, and also the presentations will be made available. Proposity did present in the last webinar for the Mountain time zone. If any of you want that presentation, just email me and I'll provide that to you following this webinar. Okay, Carrie?
Okay, thank you so much. I am going to also try to get my screen set up here so that I can share with you, so bear with me. All right, Tisha, can you confirm, are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, thank you, Carrie.
Great, okay. So hi everyone, my name is Carrie Byers and I'm the Director of Illinois Policy at the Ounce of Prevention Fund in Chicago. We're an early childhood organization, and I also chair the Early Childhood Committee for NACCE. And so what I'm going to do is provide a very high level overview with just what the kind of current status is of early care and education programs. It's difficult for me to speak very specifically to what's happening in your community or your state because truly there's so much variation and things are changing all the time. But I can at least give you kind of at a high level what we're seeing out there, and then you'll have my email at the end. If there's a specific question you'd like me to research for you, I'm happy to do that and get the answer. So let's start off with what's happening in childcare at the federal level. So the CARES Act, so one of our stimulus bills, did provide $3.5 billion in supplemental discretionary funding to states, territories, and tribes for their child care subsidy programs, or CCDF, which is the Child Care and Development Fund. Those funds can be used to continue payments to child care providers in the case of decreased enrollment or closures, so that we can make sure those programs are able to stay open, or to reopen when the current public health crisis subsides. They can also provide childcare assistance to essential workers without regard to income eligibility requirements. So this is, I know we're doing that in Illinois, so anyone who is an essential worker can access childcare subsidy, even if they are over the income eligibility that we normally set. You can also use that money to assist childcare providers who were previously not participating in the state's subsidy program with cleaning and sanitation supplies and other things necessary for them to maintain or resume operation. And then just any other allowable funds that are allowable costs that can typically be spent under CCDF. Childcare providers also have access to a variety of loans and programs through the Small Business Administration, expanded unemployment, things like that. So at the kind of state and community level, many states, if not most, have either closed or restricted operations of childcare programs in some way, and that can look like reduced group sizes, providing care only for children of essential workers. I haven't really seen anywhere where there isn't a provision to provide care for children of essential workers in some way. In my own state, it's through kind of an emergency license system that like childcare providers have to apply. Or I've seen some states that have partnerships with companies like care.com so that they can connect essential workers with in-home care. Some states are providing incentives or extra support for programs and staff so that they can maintain operations. I've seen a couple of examples of children experiencing homelessness and foster children as priority groups that will continue having access to care in addition to those children of essential workers. And then in recent days, we're starting to see a lot more chatter among the early childhood folks about what reopening childcare will look like. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the very near future, but definitely something that folks are starting to think about, and also thinking and planning for subsequent closures as this continues to go on. We're seeing a lot of challenges with accessing those Small Business Administration supports for childcare programs, so that's just something to note. And then I have a link here from the Hunt Institute, which has a really nice compilation of state-by-state childcare actions. So you can go on that link and check out what's happening in your state. It will give you the status of what's open, what's closed, et cetera. All right, moving on to Head Start and Early Head Start. So the Office of Head Start has not required Head Start programs to close. However, the vast majority of programs have closed. Early Head Start and Head Start programs are still providing services to families, though, to the extent practicable. So that's not necessarily, their centers might not be open, but they are still in touch with families. USDA waived group setting requirements for meals. So many programs are continuing to provide food to families, either via delivery or distribution sites. The Office of Head Start does not recommend home-based services continue in person, but many programs are continuing to do virtual communication and support for families. So basically moving their home visits from in person to via video chat, kind of like what Julie was saying. The CARES Act did include some additional money for Head Start, $750 million for coronavirus-related needs, and $500 million of that is specifically for supplemental summer programs. So for those programs that don't typically operate over the summer, this is funding that will allow them to do that and to provide priority for currently enrolled children who are entering kindergarten in the fall and those with IEPs. All right, just a couple things about Head Start and Early Head Start. I would encourage you strongly to continue referring children to Early Head Start and Head Start programs. The families will continue to receive some support, even if the program sites are closed. And it also makes sure those children can be eligible for those supplemental summer programs if they're able to open, and continued enrollment in the fall. You can also advocate for children experiencing homelessness to be included as a priority population for enrollment in those supplemental summer programs as well. And I'd also encourage you to reach out to your local Head Start programs and identify collaboration opportunities. There may be ways to combine resources to improve or expand your food and supply distribution and provide collaborative support to families. And then there's a link here if you want to read more about Head Start and Early Head Start. So preschool, this is another one that's going to vary from state to state. If you're school-based, if your schools are closed, obviously your school-based pre-K programs are closed. Generally speaking, if childcare is closed, your community-based preschool programs are closed. I'm hearing different things about remote learning being offered. Some places are doing it, some are not. I know that it's something we're still trying to figure out with what that really looks like with very young children, and how you do that in a way that is developmentally appropriate. So I'll definitely be sharing out more resources as those become available and we can get those out to you. Connectivity, I think, just like K through 12, is a concern for families with young children who are experiencing homelessness as well. So something we're watching. The CARES Act did include that $13.5 billion for the Education Stabilization Fund and the $3 billion for the Governor's Education Relief Fund, which are both pretty flexible in what you can do with them. And I know many states are now thinking or making decisions about what they'll do with those funds, but they can support pre-K programs and McKinney-Vento programs. So it might be something to get in touch with your system leaders and find out how those funds are being used and perhaps put in a plug for supporting children experiencing homelessness. Home visiting programs, again, many programs are not continuing to visit families in person, but many states and programs are taking steps to continue supporting families via those virtual visits. You can see here a link. The information available nationally on the status of home visiting programs is pretty limited, but 0 to 3 does have a link with some states that they are aware of and kind of what's happening with those home visiting programs. So you can click there to see that. Many of the home visiting models have provided guidance on how to conduct visits virtually during this time. Some of that guidance may actually be useful to other types of providers who might do home visits, but perhaps not as regularly as our home visitors. So some of that guidance might be helpful for you to check out as well. There are some coronavirus FAQs posted to the MICV, the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting site. This is our federal funding for home visiting that every state has. If you want to read more about the kind of current status of home visiting. And then Child Trends has some nice information on telehealth and home visiting. Early Intervention and Early Childhood Special Education. So this is our Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA Part C and Part B 619 programs, services for children with disabilities. EI is infants and toddlers. Part B 619 are children aged 3 to 5 with IEPs. So in terms of kind of the status here, I think what we know is that many children with disabilities and their families are currently without critical special education and early intervention supports during this time. There is really no kind of easy way to move those kind of supports that families are usually getting in person, either in their homes, in the case of EI, or at school for early childhood special education. To move that into a virtual space. So I think that's something that's also rapidly developing and trying hard to improve those service and supports to families. I know there was a little confusion at first about kind of what needed to continue being provided, but the Department of Ed did put out a supplemental fact sheet that reaffirms the rights of students to receive those educational supports under federal special education law, and you can read that here. Many early intervention services are actually being delivered virtually, but that, of course, also varies state by state. And then the link I've posted here is for the Division of Early Childhood under the Council for Exceptional Children. They have a nice resource page on kind of the status of EI and early childhood special ed across the country and related resources. Just wanted to mention a few kind of post-COVID-19 considerations for you to think about as you work with families with young children. We need to be prepared that both the supply and demand of programs will be changed after this. I think we're anticipating less capacity overall in our system as state budgets shrink and funding for early childhood programs is scaled back. We know many childcare providers are going to struggle to remain open. We expect many childcare providers to close their doors during this time and may not reopen. So that's just something to think about. The stability of our early childhood workforce as well. This is a group of people that are already very underpaid. Many are now out of work and may not come back, which further exacerbates our capacity problems. And then it will be more important than ever that we are advocating for children experiencing homelessness to be intentionally prioritized for these early care and education slots. Because with less capacity overall, there's just going to be much more competition for those slots. So just leaving you here with some resources, the Alliance for Early Success also has a nice compilation of state-by-state information on early childhood programs. First 5 Years Fund has a CARES Act overview that gives really good information on what's in the CARES Act for early childhood. I found the Bipartisan Policy Center COVID-19 page to be extremely useful in explaining not only the kind of education and early childhood resources and funding that's available, but just even navigating things like, the unemployment and Small Business Administration loans. There's some really good summaries there. Child Care Aware of America also has a nice landing page that has resources both for providers and for families. And then finally, the CDC put out guidance for early childhood programs that are continuing to operate during this time. And here's my email information, Carrie Byers, and my colleague Asia Kennedy is also available to answer questions. So feel free to reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to answer a question or provide some support for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. Again, these presentations will be made available afterwards. If you'd like to receive them, just shoot me a quick email. Also, this is being recorded, and I will also provide the link through our newsletter that goes out following this presentation. Michael is up next. Michael's going to speak on housing. Michael, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and do your presentation. Again, questions will be taken from the questions in the chat in the order in which they are received. So please put your questions there. Thank you. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Santos. I'm a registered legal aid attorney at Bay Area Legal Aid here in San Francisco Bay Area. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully this goes through. Let's see. Uh-oh, let me see. All right, looks like I'm having some difficulties. Give me 1 minute.
Under Present Now, hit Screen Share and then click on the screen in the box, and then you should be able to present, Michael.
Okay. See. All right, sorry, give me 1 more second. I do apologize.
Yep, I think he temporarily got pushed off. I did notice his connection was pretty weak. Maybe that might be a problem. If there are any questions, if you could go ahead and put your questions in queue. If not, I know Julie raised some issues on internet connectivity, if anyone had any questions regarding that. I know in addition to the mobile buses being placed in various areas for the students to access internet, that also libraries and schools were doing the same, allowing students to park in parking lots to access internet so that they were able to do the continued learning. Any additional questions? Oh, I see Michael's back. Unmute yourself, Michael.
I'm having technical difficulties.
There you go. Understandable. Your connectivity is so much better now. Whatever you just did.
Okay. Okay, let me give it one more try. Otherwise, we'll just make the PowerPoint presentation available online.
We got you.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to do this old school where I'll share my screen and then go through this. Hopefully you can see the first slide. So today I just want to give a brief overview of Bay Area Legal Aid, or what we call it here, Bay Legal's housing law practice in San Francisco. So if at any point you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll provide that at the very end of my presentation. So just to briefly go over what we do here at Bay Area Legal Aid, we have five offices across the Bay Area in different counties. So I'm based in San Francisco, but our main office is actually in Oakland, in Alameda County. And we provide a variety of legal aid services, not just housing, but also working with domestic violence survivors, consumer law unit, which we've actually seen an uptick in number of people having questions around their stimulus paychecks and getting scammed. We also work on public benefits. We have a youth justice unit. We also provide services around immigration law, health access, and re-entry. So for the housing practice, there's three big buckets that I think I want to flag for the group in terms of what we actually do at Bay Area Legal Aid. So there's the eviction defense, or what we call unlawful detainers. We also work with tenants and families living in subsidized housing. So for a lot of you, that's probably public housing, or if they're using some form of a voucher. We also work on fair housing laws. And so I'm actually going to touch briefly on fair housing laws at the very end. So what is particularly unique about Bay Area Legal Aid is that we have a legal advice line, and that's a number that we provide to our to Bay Area residents that they can call if they have any questions or need legal advice. And it could be any. The way it works is that they call this number, and an attorney will be able to provide them with resources, but also give them advice. And make a warm handoff to an expert in a particular area of law. So, if someone calls the line for some housing issues in San Francisco, then I will be able to actually connect with them if they need further assistance or just legal advice. And for the San Francisco office, a lot of what we're seeing are tenants and families getting evicted. Their subsidized housing was denied or terminated, or they've been discriminated by their landlord. And so those are what we call fair housing violations. And so going back to unlawful detainers, there's a couple of things that I really wanted to flag for this group. First is that San Francisco passed Prop F, which is our tenant right to counsel. So it's we're the second in the country to actually have to guarantee access to an attorney in eviction proceedings. The first one is actually in New York City. And the main difference between the two jurisdictions at the moment is that in San Francisco, there's actually no income limit. So people who have higher incomes, they may not necessarily be considered as low income, may still have access to an attorney under Proposition F, or the Tenant Right to Counsel program. And as many of you know, access to counsel is going to be really important once we lift our shelter-in-place orders, once we try to resume normal operations, because we're anticipating a flood of evictions happening across the Bay Area. The other part that I wanted to highlight is this model that we have in the San Francisco office in particular about partnering with social workers. So in addition to actually having an attorney, we also have a social worker on staff to provide wraparound services, non-legal services to our clients. And what that means is when a client comes in to me, for example, I will be able to help them with their legal issues. So for example, they will come in with, a non-payment of rent case. But as an attorney, legally, there's very little I can do to assist them with how they could be able to pay back that rent. And so our social worker plays a very, very important role in terms of connecting that client and their family to critical services, including rental assistance or supports and services that would help stabilize them, so that they can actually effectively participate in their legal proceedings, and B, they can actually have the stability so that they will be able to address the eviction itself. And one thing I would also note is that I find it really helpful to be working with social workers, and not just like social worker in our practice, but also social workers and our other external partners. Partly because we're seeing a lot of trauma manifesting in our clients. A lot of them are still in crisis. A lot of them are still under a lot of stress. A lot of them have experienced trauma by the time they come to me. And so it's really, really important to have another coworker, a social worker, or a partner who would be able to provide some additional support so that they can so we can help de-escalate the crisis that they're in. A couple of things I wanted to know. So there is a limited eviction moratorium happening on the federal level, and so I provided some resources for all of you if you would like to check it out. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development issued its guidance in the form of FAQs, and this applies to the eviction moratorium only applies to public housing, housing choice voucher, and Section 8 programs. And so if you have families living in subsidized housing, if they have a voucher, then there are some rules on the federal level that apply in terms of when and how their landlords will be able to evict them if there is an actual eviction happening in the future. The National Housing Law Project also has a couple of resources that I think you might find helpful. So I just provided that website for you all. And also the National Low Income Housing Coalition has some resources on coronavirus housing and homelessness. So I'm not going to get into the details of state and local eviction moratoria, but I do want to flag that here in California, we have a statewide, we don't have a statewide eviction moratoria. The state eviction rules only apply if you are unable to pay rent due to COVID-19. So what that means is that if there's a public health and safety concerns about a family's tenancy, that doesn't actually involve like not being able to pay rent due to COVID-19, the landlord may still proceed with an eviction in court. On the local level, we have additional tenant protections. But again, that also only applies if the tenant or the family is unable to pay rent due to COVID-19. And it doesn't, again, there's an exception to the rule that if it's concerning domestic violence, public health and safety, nuisance, those cases are still allowed to proceed under our state and local eviction moratorium rules. And it's really, really critical at this point to, if you know of a family who is facing eviction prior to COVID-19 or is at risk of imminent eviction, meaning like they've actually gotten a notice from the landlord, they've gotten some letter from the landlord saying that they might be evicted, it's really important to be able to connect them to an attorney. And part of it is because rules constantly change. It is very fluid at the moment. I think COVID-19 has exposed how unprepared the legal system is in terms of handling this type of crisis. And the next slide focuses on just the overview of the unlawful detainer, the eviction process. And again, this varies state by state, locality by locality. So here in the Bay Area, our eviction procedures in San Francisco actually differ from the eviction procedures happening in Oakland. There are a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. So, so I'm only able to represent families and households living in the city and county of San Francisco because that's where I practice. But as you can see, there's a lot of steps that need to happen in order to actually effectively address an eviction proceeding. So it starts with a notice from the landlord about an eviction, and then there's also a summons and complaint. So once there is a summons and complaint, that means that they had filed the eviction proceedings in court. And tenants households really need to file an answer. And part of the reason why we have the tenant right to counsel is actually to assist families and households and tenants in filing their answer and going through the right prong of this chart, right? What we're seeing before it happened is that a lot of people are getting evicted for technical reasons. They didn't file an answer. They got a default entered on them. They didn't show up. And what's also important to know is that the eviction process is a summary proceeding, meaning it goes really, really fast. Here in San Francisco and California, once a tenant gets a summons and complaint, they have five court days. So that includes holidays and Saturday and Sunday to respond to the summons and complaint. And so a lot of families end up missing that deadline. And so landlords are able to evict them as soon as that 5-day deadline passes and they get a default. And so it's really, really important to be able to connect to an attorney if at all possible. And there are several ways that you can actually do it in your local jurisdiction. So you can check out the local bar association. They might actually have additional resources. You can also look at the court's website, your local court website, if they have any resources or additional information for tenants who are seeking representation. You can also check out the American Bar Association. The Commission on Homelessness and Poverty have additional resources, and I'm happy to provide that on the chat later after this presentation. So I also wanted to touch briefly about providing legal information versus legal advice. And I think the purpose of this is really just to highlight the importance of connecting families, tenants, and individuals to an attorney if at all possible. What exactly is legal advice? Well, telling a member of the public what to do, right, rather than how to do it, generally would probably not be giving legal advice, but it's still, there's still that gray area. So legal advice is a written or oral statement that interprets some aspect of the law, court rules or court procedures. You're recommending a specific course of conduct that a person should take in a legal proceeding. And it really applies to like the family or the individual person's specific factual circumstances. Right. And so here's a chart of like what a legal information versus legal advice, how those two are different. And the reason why I highlight this is because going back to the chart that I just went over, it can be really, really complicated. And I think a lot of the clients that I work with have all these questions, like, should I go, should I try to work this out with my landlord, or should I actually go through with my eviction case and try to win it at the very end. And so those are the things that we advise our clients. And so again, highlighting the importance of being able to connect families that you work with to an attorney if possible, and if you can do it as soon as possible. So a couple of other things I wanted to highlight. We also do some fair housing work in San Francisco. And so the purpose of fair housing laws is really to prevent discrimination in housing by making it illegal to disadvantage someone in renting, buying, or occupying an apartment because of that person's membership in a protected class. And so two big goals of fair housing is to prevent discrimination and also equal access to housing and housing opportunities. On the federal level, there's several protected fair housing classes. So that's, you can't be discriminated based on your race or color, sex or gender, religion, national origin, family status, and disability. California has additional classes that include sexual orientation, source of income, and arbitrary traits. So these are just some of the discrimination laws that I wanted to flag for all of you working with families who may face imminent risk of eviction and therefore homelessness. Fair Housing Amendments Act in California. In our state, we also have the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. And there's also some disability, there's civil rights laws and disabilities laws that get implicated as well when we're talking about fair housing. So if you have any questions in terms of connecting families or individuals that you work with to an attorney, I'm happy to be of a resource. So I'll give you my contact information, and I'm going to turn it back to Tisha now.
Thank you, Michael. You can go ahead and stop. There you go. Thank you. Okay, those are our presenters for the day. I'm going to ask the presenters to give their final thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. If there's any additional questions in queue, we'll go ahead and address them via email. But I do know, Michael, I'm going to ask you to give your final thoughts first, since you just finished up and address the one question that was in queue already, and that's regarding any age discrimination in housing.
Yes, that is also protected. And they may actually, you might have additional protections on the state and local level. So in terms of final thoughts, a couple of things. As I had alluded, I work with a social worker. And so I know that many of you have some social worker background. And I'm really, really grateful for all the work that you do, because a lot of the clients I see are the ones who've actually have exhausted all their resources, have those landlord-tenant relationships have broken down, and really need all the help that they could get. And I think you're all on the front lines in terms of actually preventing them from going through an eviction. And to be honest, we're anticipating a huge number of eviction cases when all of this is over, when the shelter-in-place order gets lifted here in the Bay Area. And it still remains unclear as to how the courts will deal with that, and what we can do as advocates for tenants and families who actually may face eviction proceedings in the near future. So I very much appreciate the work that you all do. So second point is that, again, highlighting the need for access to an attorney, access to counsel. I've heard rumors about possibly the courts relying on virtual juries or some form of a virtual component to actually access courts. And many of my clients really don't have that privilege, that luxury to even access an email or a smartphone. And so there remains the question of what that access to justice would look like in the near future. So something that I want to flag for you as you work with families and try to provide additional stability, because once they lose their housing, it's very, very easy for everything else to unravel in their lives. So again, much appreciation to all the work that you do.
Thank you, Michael. Carrie, if you'd like to give some final thoughts.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I, too, would like to say thank you for everything you are doing for children and families out in your communities. Working with liaisons is such a privilege to me. I think you're some of the most creative and compassionate folks out there. And what I would say as a final thought is to really encourage you to use that creativity and leverage it for serving families, like I know you're already doing, to be as collaborative as you can at the community level. Now is a time that we really need to be pooling our resources and being as efficient as we can possibly be to get services and resources out to families. I'd encourage you to reach out to your early childhood providers in your community. They really are a great resource. And then finally, I know that we're all still a little bit in crisis response mode, but it is important that we start thinking ahead to what recovery is going to look like and what is going to be needed down the road. I mentioned earlier that state and municipality, our budgets are going to be so constrained, and we're going to be thinking about, I'm sure, many cuts to services and supports. And so we'll have to really be thinking about how we can ensure that children and families experiencing homelessness don't get lost in all of that. So I'd encourage you to advocate, use your voice to make a difference and speak up, and be thinking about some creative solutions that you can pass on to your state and community leaders.
Thank you, Carrie. Julie?
Me too. We NAC really appreciate all of you that are on this call and all those that aren't able to make it with us today, for your support, your passion, and your genuine caring and giving for the students and families that you and we all serve. If it wasn't for all of us and the others that are considered essential workers throughout this, our families would be really left in the dust. So really want to thank all of you for putting the needs of your students first, and sharing with each other what resources are working and what aren't, and to continue to do that. Like both Michael and Carrie said, really kind of pooling together and finding what it is that works best for all of our families. If there's ever anything we can do to help you, please let us know, and we really appreciate you all.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, this has been recorded. If you want to go back and review it, the presentations can be made available to you. Just send me an email and I'm happy to provide them. You can also receive the emails, the presentations from the previous webinars. There's one happening right now, next for the West Coast. That will also be available, and all the presentations will be available. I think it's been extremely helpful to be able to hear how everyone across the country, not just in your region, is handling some of the service delivery issues. It's been very helpful, I know, sitting on all of these calls to be able to assist people in other regions on the other webinars. Thank you so very much for all you do. Please take care of yourselves. Self-care is critically important during this time for everyone, especially all of you who are directly on the ground and servicing our children and youth experiencing homelessness. If you go to our Facebook page, there is some yoga sessions that were done by one of our board members. She's a homeless and foster youth liaison out of California. She's also certified in yoga and meditation, and she did a couple of amazing yoga sessions on Facebook Live. You can go to our Facebook page and access those anytime you like. Take care, be safe, be well. Bye-bye now.